Hello everyone, this is The Amateur, where we're here just to talk life, hobbies, politics, ideologies, what have you. And on today's episode, we're going to be getting into the Virginia gubernatorial race, as you might be able to tell from the title. But before we get into that, I do want to note that I am using a new camera. I have lighting, which I don't know how I feel about it because I feel like you can see my face a little bit too clearly. Okay, and I just so happens to be wearing a dash of makeup, so okay. But anyway, the other thing that I wanted to mention before we get started is that, when I first heard the word gubernatorial, I was like, what is that? And why do we say gubernatorial instead of governatorial? Because we say govern for like literally anything else. So I looked it up, and apparently the reason is because language. And for whatever reason, for the word gubernatorial specifically, we decided to stick with the Latin root for the word guber or gubernator. I don't know. Anyway, we stuck with the Latin root for gubernatorial, but decided to keep the French root of govern for like literally everything else. So make it make sense. It doesn't. But all that being said, like I just mentioned before, today we're going to be getting into the highly contested Virginia gubernatorial race, which has gained a lot of national attention, up along with, the gubernatorial races for New Jersey, and really just talking about all the implications behind what's going on. All that to say though too is like I am not a Virginian, but right now I do currently live in the DMV. I'm going to be moving soon, thank the Lord. But I do live in the DMV. I do know that, especially when you start talking about like Northern Virginia or Nova, DC, that lower, Maryland area, it's like it is a very heavily blue bubble area. I'm talking no King's Rally, protest heavy. Like I would be leaving my apartment and like on the day of the rally, I'm like seeing people actually like protest. Beyond me. But despite being so blue heavy, Virginia is a bit of like a swing state. And this is just again, especially with everything that's going on with the new Trump administration. This is just a must watch race. I do have family members in Virginia who are able to vote. I have not actually engaged in conversation with them about their politics on this, whether you believe that or not. Sometimes I don't need to know, but it is what it is. With everything that's been being said, I know there's been scandals. We'll get into that a little bit later on, going into this. But that being said, we're going to go ahead and just really get a little bit into the political scene of the Virginia race. And so kind of like how I mentioned before, Virginia is a bit of a swing state. I feel like historically it's been mostly Democratic in like the last maybe 20 to 30 years. Since like the 80s, it's been almost consistently half and half representing Republicans, half and half representing Democrats. And right now with the political climate, where Virginia seems to be really hitting is that typically they vote for the governor that is the opposite party of the current administration. So I think we saw when Biden was in administration, they voted for Republican. When a Republican was in administration, they voted for a Democrat. So that's kind of like the political swing that Virginia tends to note. And then just as far as with what the rules are for Virginia governors, what I've seen is that governors are only meant to serve one 4-year term and they can't serve it consecutively. I want to say there's about 3 governors in the history of the Commonwealth of Virginia that have served more than one term, but typically it's just one 4-year term, which is why Governor Glenn Youngkin, who's the current governor, is stepping down, and why they are now having another gubernatorial race. And with noting why, kind of the political swing for Virginia, like Glenn Youngkin He was primarily elected into office on issues of transgender rights and parental rights at a state and time where parents definitely felt like they weren't being included in the conversation. There's a lot of scandals that are still ongoing with like situations in Fairfax County and Loudoun County, all those places where they've been having incidents, especially of like boys and men in women's spaces, and like the whole book banning, like all these things, or lack of book banning, I think is what it was. Students who were, attempting, self-unaliving, being in part of clubs that weren't shared, like that information was being shared with their parents, things of that nature. So that was kind of the political climate around Glenn Youngkin's, election. But we'll currently get into who the current Democratic races are, or get into who the current candidates are for this 2025 election. So first and foremost, on the Democratic side, the Democratic candidate, who is also the favorite candidate, she's the most well-funded. This is a little bit of an aside. I've seen ads from her on Snapchat. I have not yet opened it, but it's like an ad that doesn't stay, like pops up, because I don't know. Okay, so maybe you don't know if you're not into Snapchat, but Snapchat will have this thing where an ad will come up as like if it's a notification from a friend or something. And you have the opportunity to like open that snap. And so I've seen one for Abigail Spanberger for that, and I'm sure that costs money. Anyway, all that to say is that I've seen ads from Abigail Spanberger. I just haven't. Spanberger, I don't know if I just said her name right. I just haven't opened it yet. And I want to be able to. So maybe by the time I end up like editing and posting this, I'll like screen record what that looks like, so we can kind of see what it is that she's putting a lot of money into. But other being said, Abigail Spanberger, she is 46 years old currently. She has 3 children, and I want to say 3 daughters. I'm not sure if she is a Virginia native, but I believe she is, and graduated from school from Virginia. She was a former CIA operations officer, and she was in the House of Representatives, which will be important when I get to the debates of this talking about. It'll be important when I talk about the debates later in this conversation. But she's generally upheld as this kind of moderate Democrat, someone who's meant to be able to reach across the aisle to work with both sides. That's kind of how she's been portrayed. Whether that's an accurate reflection of what she truly does is like another story. And I think her primary campaign is really about cost of living, affordability. And there was like something on energy. I don't know if that's like the main piece of her campaign, but that is something that Winsome Earle-Sears would bring up. But we'll get more into that one again when talking about the debates. And then on the other side, on the Republican side, is Lieutenant General. She's the current Lieutenant General of Virginia, but Lieutenant General Winsome Earle-Sears. She is not a Virginia native because she is a naturalized citizen who immigrated from Jamaica. She served within the Marine Corps for several years, so she is a veteran. And she's more about common sense, is what I would say her platform is. I mean, also I'm biased. Obviously, I'm biased towards the more conservative candidate. I will. I'm not trying to hide that from anyone. But her biggest platform, I believe, is mostly looking at tax cuts, making sure that parental rights are for the parents, as well as just being, again, tough on crime, working with ICE, working with the current administration on policies. But okay, so as I mentioned before, though, is that the current gubernatorial race for Virginia has just been riddled with scandal, and it's been scandal almost all on the Democratic side. I'm not sure if it's just that whatever, I just don't think, I mean, again, Winsome Earle-Sears is 61. I don't think she's really getting into much. She's in a different generation, but all the scandals have been coming from the Democratic side, and like, they're all the things that they say they hate. Number one being, the first thing that popped up was the sign. And if you guys don't know, I think there was some sort of rally or speak or something at a school, and they had Abigail Spanberger's supporters were like going against Winsome Earle-Sears, and one lady was holding up a sign, and it said something along the lines like, if you can't share a bathroom with trans people, then you can't share my water fountain. Like bringing it all the way back to the freaking Jim Crow and to segregation, and segregation on race, which was like a stupid thing, versus segregation on sex, which we all like inherently realize is an actual thing. And this like the whole purpose of Title IX, and like just having safe spaces, why you have women only shelters for a reason, women only jails for a reason, like all these things where we know that things happen when you mix men and women, whether you like to say it or not. But anyway, all that being said is that, discrimination based on sex is a real thing, and in more cases than not is often warranted, versus discrimination based on race, which is, again, it's a social construct. It's like, it's not a real thing, but sex is. Anyway, so that was the first controversy. And then the other controversy, as we all know, was the Jay Jones as the Attorney General candidate for the Democratic side, who we know was making really violent threats against co-workers, colleagues, and their children, like literally wishing death upon a family and their child. And, it just sounds wild to say, but that's what happened. And and the controversy was also he doesn't actually ever say, I'm sorry. He said, obviously this is something where if he wasn't expecting for this information to get out, he wasn't going to push it out himself. But it's something where when you're talking about like repentance and you're talking about remorse, there's things that you do, but his actions and his behavior is almost like, I'm sorry I got caught. I'm sorry that this got to the front light and now I have to address this. But it seems like, at least with what the receipts would show, is that he said that with his chest, he meant it, and this is the guy who's supposed to be like the top dog of law enforcement, and this is kind of what he thinks of people he doesn't agree with. And this has just been something that's even more heinous, coming off the coattails of Charlie Kirk's murder and assassination, where we've seen that people who espouse violent rhetoric will actually could actually lead to violence. And so it's something where we're getting into a day and age, and there's a debate on how long ago maybe this started, where the expectation of our political leaders is that it is a higher standard of morality. It's like, you're telling me that in all of Georgia, I'm sorry, I'm still in Georgia Peach, but in all of Virginia, you can't find someone else who hasn't, verbally threatened death upon a family and their children to be the Attorney General. Like, there's no one else to fill the job. Are we sure? Like, are we certain about that? I don't think we are. All that being said is he said those things. He's on the Democratic ticket. And Abigail Spanberger denounces it. She denounces it, but she still welcomes him. And again, there's like debates on when we talk about, that was in the past, maybe he's changed, whether that's something that, should be looked over. And, you'll hear in the debates, Abigail Spanberger is like, well, it's not up to me about my endorsement. It's up to the people about what they want to allow. And hopefully the people are saying like, yeah, maybe we don't want this guy as the Attorney General. But also, like, if you're endorsing him, like you're endorsing kind of those beliefs, or you're almost saying that it's okay, or that's like an acceptable moray for you. Again, I don't know. We're living in a crazy timeline at this time. But those are the two kind of controversies. Doesn't look good. They all fall on the Democratic side. So this is the Democratic Party of violence, of racism, of like craziness, which now brings us to the debates. And I did watch the full hour-long debates for Abigail Spanberger and Winsome Earle-Sears. And I have some thoughts, obviously. And some of my first thoughts are really I did find Winsome Earle-Sears' interruptions to be a little bit annoying. I think there's the saying, I think it's from the Art of War or something, like never interrupt your enemy while they're making a mistake. And so, Winsome Sears, she wouldn't let Abigail Spanberger finish saying her piece, and she was just always interrupting and interjecting, which is like, it was hard to hear them. I think it was also more annoying. The moderator's actually a little bit more annoying too, with their interruption and telling her to stop and all these things. But there is something that I will say. I don't know if it was Vince Dow or if it was someone else that I was just watching on YouTube, but they did say something that, the debates are supposed to be between the candidates. So like it is like, in practice, it should be the candidates speaking to one another. It should be the candidates asking each other questions and being able to respond off of each other, because this is where their clash of ideas are. And then as the external viewers, we are looking at them and seeing, okay, oh, that was a good point, or this wasn't something I considered, or this is where she's coming from. This is where they're able to say their pieces, say their point. And I do think it's something where nowadays, I haven't watched very many debates. Actually, honestly, I think this was like the first debate I didn't even watch the presidential debate, to be quite honest. Usually I just get the highlights. I'm a highlight reel gal. I don't know what to say. But I did watch the full one of this, and I do think it's something where like the moderating rules, or at least how they did it. I think the rules are actually ridiculous. I do remember Matt Walsh saying something along the lines like, just let people speak for as long as they need to speak. Obviously, like if you're trying to debate and you're having arguments, I mean, you can't just have like filibuster and talk forever. But I think it's going to be something where, you say your piece and let the person rebut, so that they can actually feed off each other and address the points and like in the moment be able to say something. But how the debates were ran is like, one, Winsome Earle-Sears was trying to speak to Abigail Spanberger directly and try to have that conversation, have them speak to another. Abigail Spanberger was like, I'm only talking to the moderator. I'm only talking if the moderator asks me something, or if I say something. Like completely ignored that kind of one-on-one connection that, Winsome Earle-Sears was trying to make.
Not okay, and that he must leave the race because Jay Jones advocated the murder, Abigail, the murder of a man, a former speaker, as well as his children who were 2 and 5 years old. You have little girls. What would it take him pulling the trigger? Is that what would do it? And then you would say he needs to get out of the race? Abigail, you have nothing to say? Abigail, what if he said it about your 3 children? Is that when you would say he should get out of the race, Abigail? You're running to be governor.
Ms. Earle-Sears.
And then also, it was just a point where, the moderator, it's like, they were debating the moderators, and the moderators, their questions were also very biased and leading on both sides, I felt. And so it was just like, it's like the way that they asked the question, it wasn't the same question for each candidate. It was like, it was phrased in a way that played into their political ideology or played against their political ideology, but it just wasn't well balanced. And again, I'll get into that a little bit later. I say a little bit, like a little bit following when I finish my points here, just in talking about those points. So that's what I also didn't like. They're not given enough time. And with the timepiece as well, someone else had noted that, they set their rules at the beginning. They're supposed to have like a minute to respond to whatever question. They have 30 seconds to rebut, 15 seconds to clarify, something along those lines. They never really actually did that for Winsome Earle-Sears. Someone did like an actual time analysis, and they found that they kept cutting her off like 10 seconds early, 15 seconds early, like 5 seconds early, even that little amount of time. But they kept cutting her off early, so she was never able to actually finish her complete point, which is also probably why she kept feeling the need to interrupt.
What I noticed was that time and time again, they cut Winsome Earle-Sears' answers short. It wasn't just one time. It would be, understandable if that was just an accident, but for it to happen repeatedly. And then on top of that, Abigail Spanberger, her answers were allowed to go long. In fact, in many instances, the bell didn't even go off. So they were allowed 60 seconds for their initial answer, including 30 seconds for follow-up. So what I've done is I've pulled some of these clips and I've overlaid a countdown timer so that you can see that what I'm claiming is true. Now, a few seconds might not sound like a big deal. For example, 15 seconds sounds like a minuscule amount of time, but in the context of a minute, when you only have a minute to give an answer, 15 seconds cut short is 25% of your time just gone. You have no control over that. In the span of 30 seconds, 15 seconds is 50% of your rebuttal time gone. So again, a few seconds might not seem like a big deal, but when you're on a debate stage, when this is the governorship that is in question and people are relying on this debate to be informed and make the right choice, I think every second counts, and our moderators need to be held to a higher standard. So just take a look at this question when it came to energy, and just notice when the bell rings during Winsome Earle-Sears' answer.
What is your idea for offsetting the high costs of data centers, energy demands, and preventing additional rate hikes for Virginians? You have 60 seconds.
So the Virginia Clean Economy Act, when it was passed, every single Democrat voted for that. Every single one. And by the way, my opponent, Abigail Spanberger, has supported it. Well, let me tell you what it did. Speaking of no energy, it took 11,000 megawatts of power immediately off the grid, Abigail, without anything to substitute for it. And all you want, again, is wind and solar. Well, you know, it's that little thing called the technology revolution that's still happening. And it's that little thing called the, industrial revolution that's still happening. Businesses need power. What are you going to do about that? Well, let me tell you what we are doing. We have started in the Southwest a micro-reactor program to see how we can bring energy to the Southwest and make it a regional energy hub, as a matter of fact.
Ms. Earle-Sears, you're out of time, but I do want to follow up.
So I think it's really rich that they even needed a follow-up. So they did a follow-up, and they did the exact same thing again, but this time they cut off almost 50% of her time.
The question was, what is your plan for offsetting those high costs of data centers, energy demands? What is your plan for making sure Virginians don't get stuck with the bill? So 30 seconds.
So what we need is an all-of-the-above approach to energy. We need clean coal, we need oil, we need nuclear, we need natural gas, and we need, renewables. My opponent's only plan is solar and wind. Well, what happens when the sun goes down? There is nothing.
Ms. Earle-Sears, we do need to move on to the next question.
All right, thank you, Deanna. We have a question tonight from a Norfolk State.
And unfortunately, like I said, that happened time and time again throughout the entire debate. So they accused her of not answering the question when it was their fault that they cut her off. They asked for a follow-up, and as she was really diving into the specifics here, they cut her off 50% of the way through her answer. Just absolutely ridiculous.
I think with what the debates, an hour really is not a long time to really hear in depth what is actually important and what voters actually need to know about their candidates in order to make, a well-informed decision, if that's something that even matters for them. And so first they talked about the car tax. I don't live in Virginia. I don't know what's meant by the car tax. Maybe I'll put up a little blurb on the screen that demonstrates this is what they were talking about when they're talking about the car tax. I don't really care. They talked about the J. Jones scandal, and that was something where, Winsome Earle-Sears really shined just in terms of hitting to the point. And I mean, she almost always brought it back to that, which is important because is this the guy that you want on your team who harbors these kind of ill wills? And I do think it's kind of insane that even if you do kind of regret it, at one point you were able to work yourself up into such a frenzy that you were wishing death on the children of your, political opponents, because again, they held different opinions than you, and your opinions are wrong. So they can just have that sort of angst, but this is the guy that she wants on her team, apparently, because she's not willing to not endorse him. Unendorse, is that deny? To denounce? Maybe that's the word, I don't know. To ask him to step down. I don't know what the way to say that is. That's what they talked about. And then they talked about the government shutdown. And this is where I was just kind of getting into the leading questions. So for Winsome Earle-Sears, they asked her, given that we are in a current government shutdown, would you be willing to speak to the president in order to get him to come to the table to open the government again? Which is
impact. So, Ms. Earle-Sears, knowing its impact on Virginia, if you were governor now, would you ask the president to use his power to work with Democrats to reopen the government? You have 60 seconds.
So my opponent all summer long has been playing political football with federal workers by trying to say that she loves them more than anyone else. Well, let me tell you what love looks like. It looks like Abigail calling Senators Kaine and Warner and telling them, go back, do your job, and vote against the government shutdown. We only need eight Democratic senators. That's all we need. And we cannot find 8. And yet we can find 2 in Virginia. When are you going to publicly say to Senators Kaine and Warner, go and do your job and keep federal workers working? That's the way you stop the shutdown, because right now they're having to work, and especially our military, without any pay.
I think she responded appropriately, saying the president doesn't have anything to do with the shutdown. This is right now we're at a stalemate because in the Senate you need 60 people to pass the clean whatever it is. the clean CPR, I think I'm just making things up. The clean whatever, the clean bill. I don't know if it's a clean bill or something. It's a clean something. Something is very clean. They need 60 votes to get that passed, for it to get to the president, and all 53 Republicans are voting to keep the government open. You need 7 Democrats to agree, and right now all the seven Democrats, at least 7 Democrats. None of the Democrats are, and I say none, there aren't enough Democrats that are voting to keep the government open. And so at this point, you need to ask the Democrats to actually vote, because it is their vote that's impeding, the government reopening and not anything of the president. And like Winsome Earle-Sears addressed that. But the question that they asked to Abigail Spanberger was, would you speak to the Democrats in order to get them to open? And then she goes on and talks about when she was in Congress under the first government shutdown under Trump's administration, the first time.
This one, knowing the shutdown's impact on Virginia, if you were governor now, would you urge the 2 Democratic senators to vote to reopen the government until a deal can be worked out with Republicans? You have 60 seconds.
Well, importantly, when I was in Congress, when I entered Congress, I entered during the longest government shutdown in history. And 2 weeks into my time in Congress, I went to the White House. And
just talking about that, so it's like the same questions aren't being asked, or like they keep rephrasing it. That was something that was weird. And it was and that's where just in looking at my notes, I was like, oh, that felt like it was like a leading question. It was really weird. They talked about education, they talked about energy, affordability, and then they talked about transgenderism, which is again where I feel like Abigail Spanberger didn't do well, which was again kind of avoiding the question, not really answering it until she did. And that's kind of where Winsome Earle-Sears was like, okay, now you finally said something, but I have receipts of your actions, of what you actually did when you were working in Congress and you're working at the federal level. And what you did at the federal level is completely opposite of what you're saying now. So what is it that you actually do? So these are the questions that Winsome Earle-Sears is trying to ask Abigail Spanberger, and the moderators are like, okay, moving on. We have a list of questions. This is what we're going to ask. And so that's another point where I'm just kind of like, let them speak.
And have pledged to sign legislation restricting bathrooms by birth sex. Does this position discriminate against transgender girls? You have 60 seconds.
I'm not for discriminating against anyone. What I'm saying is just very plain common sense. And I'm going to answer the question my opponent refused to answer, which is simply this. I will not rescind the governor's executive order. We know that girls want to have privacy. It's really that simple. And my opponent will not answer the question because she voted for men nude in girls' locker rooms, in bathrooms, and in girls' sports. She will refuse to protect our girls in Title IX, which is simply, an opportunity for girls to have their safe space. This is not hard. Are you going to change in a gym where men are nude in the locker rooms? Are you going to do that, Abigail?
Ms. Earle-Sears.
I don't think you will. What about your girl children if they came home crying and said that there was a male in the locker room? What would you do?
You will both have a chance to rebut.
And let them have their debate in a way that we can I get it. I get with the moderators, there's topics that the voters want to hear from, and I think that's important. But I think also letting the candidates have an actual back and forth will also be much more informative than the way it's currently formatted. Because another point was on a point on abortion. And again, y'all know how I am on abortion. I hate it. It's awful. Banned, immediately abolished. We don't want any of it. Winsome Earle-Sears' response is saying it's not the decision for abortion in the state and the Commonwealth of Virginia it's not up to me. It's up to the citizens, and I will listen to what the majority of the citizens are telling me. And then Abigail Spanberger was asked about if she had any limits, and her limits are whatever the people decide. So she also didn't say whether she had any personal limits. And I think Winsome Earle-Sears was bringing up that, hey, in Congress, or something, she voted for something for abortions up until, the 3rd trimester, or up until, the baby's almost born, or something along those lines. And Abigail Spanberger said something whatever rebuttal that she said, and I'll have to bring up that specific piece, she brought it up, and it was saying that Winsome Earle-Sears' policy was leading to the murder of women. That's what Abigail Spanberger said. Winsome Earle-Sears did not have any chance to rebut that or like address that in any way.
Abortion is legal in Virginia through the second trimester with limited third trimester exceptions. There's also a push to codify abortion access in our state constitution. Ms. Earle-Sears, you have supported both a 15-week and 6-week abortion limit. As governor, what would you advocate for? You have 60 seconds.
So my position is that the Commonwealth needs to come together and figure out where it wants to be. It's not going to be my view. It's going to be a view of the majority. My opponent, on the other hand, has the extremist view, which is abortion up until the very hour that the baby could be born, up until the very minute. And so you would have a baby aborted on the table. What do we do then, Abigail?
Spanberger, you say you want to keep Virginia the last bastion of reproductive freedom in the South. Do you support any limits on abortion? You have 60 seconds.
When the Dobbs decision was made, it was very quickly clear that state after state would move to restrict abortion access, as my opponent has previously supported. In states where they further restricted abortion access, women have died. Women pregnant with very wanted children, women with ectopic pregnancies were sent home, and women have died. If my opponent were to become governor, that is what she would inflict upon Virginia.
Ms. Earle-Sears,
I support the Roe standard.
Here, if you're talking over Ms.
I support the Roe standard. I support the constitutional amendment that is moving forward. That makes clear the.
Ms. Earle-Sears, it's difficult to hear Ms. Spanberger if you're talking over her.
I support the Roe standard, which is what this codification of a constitutional amendment moving forward would be. That's what I will support as governor, though I will not have a vote on it. I will support it. But importantly, my opponent has threatened murder to women who have had abortions. That is not the type of leadership we need here.
Ms. Spanberger, you're out of time. I just want to follow up.
I need a rebuttal.
Ms. Earle-Sears, I have to follow up right now because it was difficult for me to hear Ms. Spanberger, and I need to make sure that I have clarity on her answer. So just to be clear, are there any limits that you support in terms of abortion access, including for minors? You have 30 seconds.
I support the current laws within Virginia, which include limits on minors obtaining abortions, which include limits after the second trimester. I support those, the current laws here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and that is what is moving forward as a constitutional amendment here in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Thank you, Ms. Spanberger. We are now going to move on to immigration.
I thought I was going to get an opportunity to rebut.
We're moving on to another topic. We have a lot to cover tonight, Ms. Earle-Sears, so we'll get to you in a moment on a different topic. Now it's immigration and public safety.
So you have this really inflammatory claim on Winsome Earle-Sears about her abortion policies leading to the murder of women. And then they're like, okay, and on to the next point that we want to talk about. And Winsome Earle-Sears was like, you're not going to let me rebut that? And they're like, nope. So I just thought that was crazy. And then they talked about immigration and assisting ICE. And I think what was important, again, what I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier, was that, Winsome Earle-Sears, because of Abigail Spanberger's history in Congress, she has a voting record on the bills and on the laws that have been passed in Congress and what she voted yes on and what she voted no on. So these are the things that she supported. These are the things that she did not support. Winsome Earle-Sears had the receipts and was like, okay, you're saying this right now in this debate, but when we look at your records, your voting records in the federal government on things that affected the entire nation, not just Virginia, this is how you were voting. What's the shift? What's the change? What is it that you actually truly believe? Was this not what you wanted when you were voting for that in Congress? And this is what's the changes?
We're going to start with Governor Glenn Youngkin has tasked Virginia State Police with helping ICE to remove people living in the country illegally. Ms. Spanberger, we're going to start with you. You've said using local and state police for ICE raids is dangerous. Are there any situations in which you would support local law enforcement assisting ICE? You have 60 seconds.
Absolutely. I'm a former federal agent. I used to work narcotics and money laundering cases. I regularly worked on task force arrests and search warrants in partnership with local and state police as a federal law enforcement officer. Importantly, anytime there is a warrant, an arrest warrant, a search warrant to detain someone, absolutely local law enforcement, local resources should and must be employed. That is why, as my opponent has somewhat erroneously said, I never, ever would support making Virginia providing any sort of sanctuary policies here, because local and state law enforcement must always work with federal agencies when there is a warrant. Importantly, what I have been talking about, and anytime there is someone with any level of criminality, someone wanted for a criminal offense, absolutely that cooperation shouldn't just occur, but it must.
Thank you, Ms. Spanberger. Now, Ms. Earle-Sears, you've said you support local law enforcement's involvement with ICE raids, but critics argue that in high immigrant communities, they're seeing fewer people reporting crimes and cooperating with police. Now, are you concerned about those negative impacts to public safety? You have 60 seconds.
So I'm just going to say, Folks, go to SpanburgerLies.com. I think we're about up to number 10. She's accused me of murder, which is very interesting because the very person who spouted murder, you won't even say that they should get out of the race. And now you're talking about this? My goodness gracious. We have found 4,000 illegals who are criminally here. And the number 3 MS-13 gang leader here we have found communist Chinese gangs here. We have found cartel members here. And they're here because my opponent did not vote to shut down our borders. And because of you and that vote, fentanyl came across the borders and killed 5 Virginians every week. Where were you when we needed you for that vote? And then out of your own mouth, Abigail, you have said the first thing you're going to do is to make Virginia a sanctuary state. I didn't say that. You said
Ms.
that.
Earle-Sears?
You know, just things like that, like being able to come with that, but they weren't interacting with each other to be able to play off each other's questions and comments. Abigail Spanberger, again, was only listening to the moderators, was only responding to the moderators, which again is like, you're just not getting the, the best of it. And then at the very end of the debate, get this, they asked a fun question. They said 7 or 8 of the presidents come from Virginia. Who's your favorite president?
So this will be, I think, something that'll bring a smile to our faces tonight. The mother of presidents is the state of Virginia. A little history lesson here. So Virginia has 8 U.S.-born presidents. We'll start with Ms. Spanberger. Which one is your favorite? You have 30 seconds.
As a UVA alumna, I'm going to have to go with Thomas Jefferson.
And why?
Because he started the university, with all due respect to graduates of other universities.
Okay, we have Ms. Earle-Sears. Who is your favorite Virginia president?
Well, I would have to say it would have to be the very first one, George Washington. He was a profile in courage, absolutely. It is because of him why we don't have monarchs here. It is because of him why we have a constitutional republic. Without him, I don't think we would have had what we have today.
Thank you, Ms. Earle-Sears. We want to make sure that we get to closing statements, so we'll begin with...
Abigail Spanberger said Thomas Jefferson. Didn't we have, I say we, didn't like the nation have this whole kind of revolt against Thomas Jefferson being like the slave owner, nothing that he does, like whatever, he's a slave owner, he's a slaver, that's all they ever said about him, which is like, whatever, he is a president. Was he my favorite president? No, but like the biggest thing was that he was a slaver and he really wanted slaves, wanted to keep slaves or something along those lines. And Abigail Spanberger is like, Thomas Jefferson is my favorite president from Virginia, because he was an alum of, or he founded one of the Virginia universities, like whatever. But like that was her answer. Is that like this Democratic Party? This is what you're like going with? And Winsome Earle-Sears was George Washington, who should be the obvious winner. He's literally the first president of the United States. But anyway, I just thought that was funny, and like no one was, and like no, Abigail Spanberger said that. And like no one, it was like silent. I don't know if people were supposed to clap or if she was expecting claps or something, but it was just silent. But all that being said, and they noted this in the debates, all that being said, we're gonna get into what you see as the thumbnail and the title of this episode is into the identity politics.
So if you ask me if America is ready for its first woman president, I only got one thing to say. It's about damn time! It's about damn time!
All the polls are close and they're saying that she may lose when she literally, it is the epitome of what it is to be a person of color, especially a woman of color in this country, where when we say we have to work 10 times as hard just to get into the building, we mean that.
Yeah.
Ain't nobody gave us nothing.
So again, let me say this one more time. If you are a black girl, I am supporting you. I don't care where you coming from, because you deserve to see other women that look like you, that are out here really putting on for you, really connecting with you.
As a community, do you think we could do differently to support our black women candidates?
Donate.
Because here's the snoop. Virginia, obviously being the Commonwealth, being one of the first 13 colonies, they have one of the longer histories, state histories of all of the states. And so Glenn Youngkin is currently the 74th governor of Virginia, and all governors before him have been men. And what's historical about this race in Virginia, as has been noted, is that no matter who is voted in, Virginia is going to have their first female governor, which 75th governor, like 75 is like a pretty good number. But yeah, but Winsome Earle-Sears has never once led anything in her campaign with her sex or with her race or with her physical identity. She's usually all about her service, about her faith. Those are the things that if she's going to say something about her identity, that is where that stems, that's where it comes from. But I think it was important, and my friend told me this, and I was like, oh, I did not realize that. But there has never been a Black female governor in the entire United States history of America. For the last 200 and something years, there's never been a single female Black governor. And it's really difficult. So again, when we're talking about, especially executive command, you have Black mayors, Black female mayors. Have those cities been ran well? That's a debate. I'm saying that not having done much, research on who that pertains to, but the things that I think of, it doesn't, look the greatest. But anyway, all that being said is that this gubernatorial race has the opportunity to change American history and have the first Black woman governor in the United States history. And you'd think that this is what the Democratic Party would want, right? The party of DEI, the party of breaking barriers, the party of supporting women, the party of supporting BIPOC voices, the party of supporting Black women voices. This was the party that pushed Kamala Harris through. Am I pronouncing her name right? I keep hearing it different ways. Come on, Kamala Harris. Yes. Yes. She's a former immigrant. She's immigrated to this country, a naturalized citizen, served in the United States. This should be every Democrat's dream. They're always talking about how we don't have enough Black woman representation and power. But now that we have this opportunity for this strong, independent Black woman, and she doesn't stand on the laurels of Donald Trump's legacy and of his history. She's never once directly asked, to my knowledge at least, she's never once asked for his endorsement, and Trump has not endorsed her like formally or publicly. I think he said at one point like she should win, but that wasn't like a, hey, Republicans, go get out and vote for, if you're in Virginia and you can vote, go vote for her. So like he's never once said that. And they've clashed. Winsome Earle-Sears does not agree with everything that Donald Trump does and has criticized him, which is where some of that, like, they're not buddy or anything. But all that to say is, since, again, Black women in a position of power, potentially, how might the Democrats explain why they won't support making history of having Governor Winsome Earle-Sears not only the first woman governor of Virginia, but the first Black woman governor of the entire United States? How might they answer that? Riddle me that. And I think what's really funny, because they all talk about this being the history breaking because you had the first female governor, but no one, like, nowhere in the media do they ever talk about like, oh, this is a possibility that we could have our first Black governor ever. Like that the identity politics is never brought up in her case because she doesn't support the ideal. She doesn't support the ideology that they want her to be. And obviously, like, I don't want Winsome Earle-Sears to run on her identity, but because she's not doing it, they're also not pressing that piece, even though it's still part of the bigger picture of what's going on. Like, and I don't think Winsome Earle-Sears is ever going to do that. I don't want her to do that either. But it's this, trust Black women. We need more Black women in leadership, all these other things. But we see now that you can still vote for Abigail Spanberger against a Black woman. And are the Democrats now racist, or what are we? Oh, so you can vote for someone not because of their race, because they don't support the values or beliefs that you hold. Are we going to admit that piece, or how are they going to swing this? That's just kind of what I'm trying to figure out. Because if representation truly mattered to the Democrats, then they should be celebrating. They should be celebrating this, potential historic moment, even dare I say, pushing her candidacy forward so that they can break barriers and be like, we were part of the team that helped break barriers. I normally vote Democrat, but I voted Republican for this candidate because we want more Black women in power or something like that. But they can't because they're racist. And they've actually shown that already through their signs and by supporting Thomas Jefferson. My whole take on this, and again, as you've kind of seen from the beginning, is just like, if Abigail Spanberger wins this race, the Democrats are never allowed to talk about identity politics ever again. Like, they can't berate Republicans or conservatives or whatever for not voting for someone just due to, you know, their race or due to their sex or due to some sort of identity that they think is important if it's not relevant to any of the policies that they're going on. They're not allowed to do it because they have this opportunity to support a Black woman coming in power, and it's, you know, and making history, not only just for Virginia, but for the nation, about progress, how we're going from this all white men, you know, in power to having all, you know, to be able to push for a Black woman in power. So I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. They're not allowed to push it anymore, especially if Abigail Spanberger wins. Now, if Winsome Earle-Sears wins, they're still not allowed to do it because it's stupid. She didn't run on her race. She didn't run on her sex. She ran on her ideals and her values and her morals, and that's what got her in. You know what I'm saying? So all I'm saying is, I just don't want the Democrats to be hypocritical about this particular issue. Because since the Declaration of Independence was signed, you know, the Democrats had this opportunity handed to them on this golden platter to be able to vote for a Black woman in an executive position. But who are they deciding to choose instead? A liberal white woman. So if Winsome Earle-Sears loses, it just shows that identity is just a convenience thing for them. It's just a tool. It's a political tool for the leftists, which we kind of already knew, and it's not a genuine value, and just bring up this race anytime they want to say anything about identity politics, okay? Winsome Earle-Sears is never going to make this about her race. She's never going to make this about her sex. But I really do wish someone in the conservative media that has a space with, you know, liberals and leftists, if they ever talk about the Virginia gubernatorial race, to like bring up this fact just to watch them squirm and say why breaking history in this way isn't monumental when it's a Black conservative woman. And that's why they're not voting for the Black candidate. I just want someone to do it. I just want anyone to do it, really. But anyway, so that's what I'll leave you today. If the political party that claims to champion diversity only celebrates it when it's politically useful, that it's not a genuine value, it's not about diversity, it's not about equity or inclusion, it's about control. You can't say representation matters and then ignore the very representation that you claim you're fighting for. But what the heck do I know? I'm just an amateur praying for Winsome Earle-Sears to beat Abigail Spanberger in this gubernatorial race, and just hopefully bring a little bit of sanity to Virginia politics. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do so respectfully. Make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks for watching.